This was my average before using these simple tricks, and here it is after. The first and most important thing that you can do at any skill level is improve your look ahead. Now don't just click off yet, because I'm going to show you how much of a difference this can actually make by showing you 3 clips, each with part of a solve. I want you to pay very close attention and try to find which is the most efficient. Then I will explain how you can implement this and use it to your advantage so easily. In the first clip, I decided to turn slow, but I had good look ahead, which means my turning was fairly efficient. However, it wasn't too fast because I wasn't doing my maximum turns per second. Next, on this one, I was turning very fast and had good look ahead, meaning in this clip I was able to turn very efficiently. And then finally, in clip 3, I was turning very fast, but my look ahead was terrible, meaning I kept pausing. This is an issue that I would probably see in your solves. I assume it was fairly clear that the second one was the best, and it is also clear that you need to improve your look ahead to improve rapidly, much like I did recently. But how can you do this? Make sure to remember this graph whilst I'm telling you about these techniques, just to remind you how effective these actually are. What you will find a lot of on YouTube is that you need to do slow solves, and whilst this works a bit, I find it so boring, and I can imagine a lot of you probably do too. Luckily, there is a much better way to improve your look ahead. Simply, to start with, all you need to do is practice your F12 pairs. I use a method J-Perm suggested, which is to look at a pair and then close your eyes. You should then be able to solve this without looking at the cube. If you can do this every time, then you are one step closer to having incredible look ahead. The next step is to train yourself to insert your pairs into the back of the cube. So if you look at this case here, you can see that a cube rotation would be needed unless you did it like this, which isn't too efficient, so I wouldn't recommend it. What most people would do is rotate like this and solve like this because it is easy. However, what I recommend you do is to turn it like this and then solve it into the back like this. Now, you've done no new moves here, and this is exactly the same as what you would have done. Instead, you've just solved it into the back. I have found this really useful in improving my look ahead, and I'll show you why. If you solve the pairs into the front spaces, there is a high likelihood that either a corner or an edge will be in the back slots. This means it is very difficult to look ahead to these pieces because of how little you can actually see of them. This inevitably leads to rotations to solve these pieces, which isn't good and will slow you down massively. However, if you've got this case and you've solved into the back, you can do it so much easier without any rotations. So for this, I have solved both pairs into the back, and I've only got the front pairs to do. You can see now that I can really easily look ahead to this piece, and I know that these two are going to be next. So I can perform these really easily with absolutely no cube rotations and a much faster solve down the line. The next step to improved look ahead is what I like to call piece prediction. There is a piece here which I cannot fully see. However, I know I need a red-blue piece to go in here. I also know that these pieces aren't correct because they have yellow on them. This means I can deduce that this one at the back is the one I need. You see, by predicting what each piece is, I can reduce the amount of times it takes me to solve that pair. I no longer have to waste time doing this to see it, or doing a cube rotation. Now I can solve it really easily and efficiently by just knowing what each piece is. The best way to train this is through what I like to call focus solves. Ordinarily, I might be watching YouTube or not fully concentrating on what I am actually doing, which means I am not doing my best solves. However, the way I like to train myself to predict pieces is by really concentrating on what I am doing when solving. This is making sure that I'm not drifting off, and I'm really devoting all attention to that one F12 pair. This might be hard for some, but the results are actually very good, and it shows how effective this method is, especially compared to slow solves, which might be some people's first choice on deliberate practice. That sums up the look ahead section of this video, but there are still more techniques and tricks that I have used in the past week to rapidly decrease my average. So next, to those people who just do solves, which I assume will be the majority of you, don't do this. Most people would end at this, but I'm going to tell you why only doing solves is bad. As cubers, we all have bad habits, even Timon and Max, so if you just do solves, you are only helping your bad habits grow even faster. This is because each time you do a solve, you become more accustomed to your bad habits. Then, after a while, it becomes so hard to change and reverse them, meaning you don't change them, and you just keep doing solves, which ruins your chances of ever improving. It eventually becomes so difficult to change your habits that you don't try anymore, and just end up with the same old, terrible solves. This is where an amazing thing called deliberate practice comes in. So we've mainly spoken about F2L with the look ahead section, meaning now I'm going to focus on the last layer. The deliberate practice method for last layer goes like this. Take a cube and do an algorithm, just like this. What you will find is you can perform it relatively fast without making any mistakes. Now what you should do is do the same algorithm but try and push it a lot faster. What happens to begin with when you do this is that you'll make lots of mistakes, just like I did there. This is fine because there are plenty of benefits of going faster than you can do normally. This method makes you push yourself a lot more, which inevitably leads to fast algorithms as you become more used to turning at that speed. Over time, the mistakes you make whilst using this speed reduces, making your algorithms just amazing. When you first start pushing your turns, it will be messy and you will lock up and overshoot quite a bit. However, over time you will become more stable when turning at this speed, which means that your new faster turning will ingrain into your muscle memory and make your algorithms so much faster. I do this as a fun warm-up, as it isn't boring like 2gen or slow solves. It also gets you ready to solve the cube at your fastest, as you have just been pushing as hard as you can. This means I recommend doing this for 5 to 10 minutes before every session of solves. Another trick that I've spending quite a lot of time on recently is the setup of my cube. In general, it doesn't make a massive difference to your solves. However, I found, for me, a setup GAN 12 dropped me half a second from my average compared to a not set up one. When you think about it, that is actually quite a lot of time. If you're averaging around 20 seconds, this means your solves are now averaging 19.5 seconds. If you add all of the other things that I've mentioned in this video so far, it will keep decreasing, and then sooner than you think, you'll be up to 19 seconds. Whereas without setting up the cube to perfection, you wouldn't have as good of an average. I think that if you take your main and spend a good half an hour cleaning the internals, then tensioning to perfection, and then finally adding lube, you will see a noticeable amount of time loss in your averages. When I say that you need to tension the cube, I don't just mean tightening it until it's somewhat okay and then leaving it at that. Instead, you should really take the time to make an amazing cube, which includes making minor adjustments after a couple of solves so you can make sure the setting you are using is perfect. This makes sure that you can extract the full capability out of the cube you are using. Another thing that I've been prioritizing recently is the analysis of my solves. I really recommend that you record your solves and really be harsh on critiquing every mistake you have made across the solve you recorded. I know that nearly 50% of you are watching this video on a mobile phone, which means the majority of you have the capability to record your solves. And even if you are not using a phone, there is a high likelihood that somewhere within your house there will be a camera to use. Once you have filmed an average, slow it down and pick apart every little bit that you did wrong. From there, focus on small parts at a time. For example, I know that my cross isn't great and it usually takes me more than it should, so I'm going to scramble the cube and use the full 15 seconds of inspection to make sure that I can solve the cross in sub 1 second every time. Once I have done only the cross, I will then re-scramble the cube and repeat. You can probably see what to do now. If you are bad at recognizing algorithms, then use an algorithm trainer. If your turns per second is low, then focus on more precise turning. There is always something that you can do to get better, no matter how perfect you think your times are. And this is how world records are constantly being broken. People are just picking apart their solves and making them better and better and better, which is what you should be focusing on. And the final piece of advice that I want to emphasize even more, even though I've already mentioned it in this video, don't just do solves. Subscribe.